first episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds has debuted on Paramount Plus, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your thoughts on Episode 1 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This is a spoiler-free review, so try to keep your comments spoiler-free, though I don't know that there's a ton to spoil in this episode given the nature of the show. With that said, let's get started talking about what is Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, if you're a longtime Star Trek fan, you can just skip over this section because you know the backstory on who Christopher Pike is and all of that fun stuff, but a lot of my audience are kind of newer to Star Trek and younger, and you might not know exactly the backstory of what makes this show particularly interesting. So essentially, the original Star Trek show had two different pilots made about it. One of them was called The Cage, and the captain of the ship was Christopher Pike. Spock was on the show, and it was the Enterprise, and it was an episode of Star Trek, but they didn't think it quite worked, and one of the pieces that they didn't love was the lead character, and they did something unprecedented that was very uncommon and still is very uncommon. They decided to order a second pilot. They didn't like the first one. They passed on it, but they said, we will let you make a second pilot. And in the second pilot, they ended up casting William Shatner as Captain Kirk. They changed around a little bit of the cast a little bit, added they added DeForest Kelley into it as Bones, and the show just kind of came together. It was a better pilot, and that led to the original Star Trek. But they decided to use that original pilot as an episode called The Menagerie, and they made it two-part episode, and they brought Christopher Pike back into it, and so then everything that happened in that original pilot was canon as stuff that had happened earlier. It was just a really clever way to use something that they shot on their TV show. And so then Christopher Pike became kind of this interesting little small piece of the Star Trek history, and then they incorporated him into the Kelvin timeline and the Chris Pine films that came out. And then when Star Trek Discovery came out during season 2, they decided to use Christopher Pike. They cast Anson Mount. They brought Spock in, and when they brought him onto the show, he was quite popular. People liked kind of his personality. He was a much more optimistic character than most of the cast of Discovery, and because he was well received and they liked Spock well enough, they went, what if we did that? Let's take Spock, and essentially we do the original Star Trek show. And we have the cast of that original Star Trek show, and Pike is the captain of the ship, and Spock's there, and the other people. And that's what Strange New Worlds is. It's the 55-year-old Star Trek show that never happened. That's also a continuation of Discovery. So just in of itself, that's a very interesting thing to exist. So in a certain sense, it's a prequel to the original Star Trek show, though the timelines aren't exactly the same, so it's not exactly a prequel to it, but it's sort of a prequel to it. It's sort of a prequel to the original pilot in certain senses. That's what this show is. With that said, let's get started talking about the good, and I'll just get right to the point. I dug this episode. Now, if you've been following my channel and my Star Trek coverage over the last 5 years, you'll know I was not a fan of Discovery. I had issues with Picard season 1 in particular, where it ended. I thought it just went off the rails. And then if you watched my season 2 Picard review that I think I posted yesterday, I don't know when these videos are actually going to go up. I'm shooting them back to back, but I thought season 2 of Picard was bad. And then I watched this, and this is kind of the first thing where I was like, okay, maybe you're paying attention. Maybe you're starting to figure out what Star Trek is supposed to be and what people want from Star Trek. And I dug this episode. Now, at its core, they're trying to do a show that gets back to the spirit of the original Trek as well as Next Generation, which is episodic storytelling. With Discovery, with Picard, they've done these serialized seasons where it's really a 10-hour movie broken up into 10 episodes or however many episodes there are, where it's just nonstop serialized. And I don't think that Star Trek is best in that format. Deep Space Nine did some of that, and it worked because of the nature of that show, where it was a space station. But that was like a standout. That was something a little bit different because of the nature of that show. Whereas at the core of what Star Trek is and when it's at its best, it's about going to strange new worlds. It's about going out there and having these adventures, different places, and that's where Star Trek has shined. And that's what the show is looking to be. So episode 1 picks up after the events of Discovery Season 2. So if you haven't seen Discovery Season 2, watch a video on YouTube recapping it. There's like, you have to know what happened in Discovery Season 2 to make sense of this first episode of the show. And kind of Pike is trying to decide what he wants to do with the rest of his life, and kind of gets recruited to go on this mission to a planet where first contact went bad. And that's not a spoiler. That's the setup for the episode and the show itself. And we go off on an adventure to this planet to try and work things out. And not that it's the smartest or most cerebral Trek of all time, but at its core, felt like a classic Star Trek setup about a planet with two groups of people that are butting heads, and the Federation trying to stop them from destroying themselves. It felt like Star Trek with modern aesthetics, modern technology, and I appreciated that. Maybe after having watched Picard Season 2 and so much Discovery that was just so dark and depressing and cynical, that watching an episode of Star Trek that was about going to a strange new world. Actually, this planet wasn't all that strange. Going to a new world, a first contact situation, and it was optimistic and hopeful. That was kind of refreshing. That was kind of nice. And I'm, for the first time in years, kind of optimistic that maybe this Star Trek show will work for me. That I'll actually enjoy it. That it'll capture the energy that I want from Star Trek and not be Game of Thrones in space or whatever the 2 seasons of Picard have been. But the lead, I think Anson Mount, I mean, he showed this on Discovery, but he's a good leading man in one of these roles, and it feels like a starship captain, that he's a little bit more broken and, I guess, jaded. I don't know if that's maybe the right word for it, but a few more doubts than, say, a Picard or Kirk had. But he has a charisma to him. He has a way with people. He has a folksiness to him. He uses a lot of figures of speech that he has to pause to explain to the people he's talking to. See, like, he has a personality. And kind of the way they've done some of the side characters, I was kind of digging it. So, like I said, maybe it's because I had just finished Picard Season 2 that just put my expectations way down low. But I watched it, and I dug it. I enjoyed the episode that we got, and I'm looking forward to future episodes. And I'll talk about the bad and some issues, concerns I have in just a moment. But for the most part, I just went, there, you did it. That's all I wanted. I don't want to be too nitpicky. I don't want to gripe too much about everything about continuity and technology. I don't want to do that. But there, you gave me Star Trek that feels like actual Star Trek. Like I said, I did have some issues, so let's move on to the bad. And probably the big thing here is something I kind of alluded to earlier, that this show very much picks up after the events of Discovery Season 2. And I think with what they did in Discovery Season 2, it feels like they wrote themselves into a weird corner. Right out of the gate with this show, that I don't want to spoil Discovery Season 2 if you're going to watch it and lead up to this, but essentially there's some things that happen with Pike and what he knows that feels like maybe they've got something really clever. There could be something really interesting and clever that they're doing with it. My first impression was like, ooh, man, they're trying to get out of a corner they wrote themselves into with what they did in Discovery because they didn't realize they're going to make a show afterwards. That's what it kind of felt like to me. And just in general, it's just so tied to this first episode, at least, is so tied to Discovery that it makes for a weird first episode for people that didn't watch Discovery, because it's just the whole time people are like, that's classified. I can't tell you what happened. I can't tell you what happened. referring to Discovery Season 2. And then it kind of mentioned it just a little bit, but it's like you have to watch a whole season of a different show to understand this one kind of at all. And that's kind of a weird way to kick off your show. If you want new people to join in and engage with it and connect with it. Another one in there, they just feel like they have to give everybody new backstory. And so they do some stuff with Spock where they introduce him that just seems like, I don't know, maybe they're going somewhere with it, and based off the trailers and stuff, it seems like they are, but it just seems like giving Spock so much of a deep backstory of stuff that he was doing before the original Star Trek show that just, I don't know why they keep doing this, like Spock had a sister and Spock had this and Spock had that. It's like, you don't have, he worked without all this stuff. He was one of the most iconic and classic characters in science fiction, television, and film without all of this. So you're taking something that was already a world-class, world-famous, one in the history books that we're still making shows about decades and decades, 55 years later. We're still talking about him because he already worked, and you're trying to add new stuff in that doesn't need to be there. Which they, for whatever reason, they feel like it seems like they just keep doing that with these Paramount Plus, CBS All Access Star Trek shows. And I don't understand whether these characters worked and they don't need new layers or to show how you're going to fix them when they're not broken. So I just thought it was weird that they keep doing some of that stuff. And my Star Trek-y nitpicky one, there's just always that question of how does this fit in the timeline with all these other things and the technology, but I've mostly just accepted it's, and I would recommend this to you. If you're someone that's just like, what is going on with the timelines and the technology's different, throw all that out. Just try as best you can. Focus, like there's things that they've done with these Star Trek shows where they just abandoned the utopian future and, and Picard made the Federation racist as a stand-in for Trump's America. That's like, the Federation is not a good stand-in. Like that is a betrayal to make the Federation a stand-in. Like what are you doing? That stuff I think are valid criticisms, like of betraying the continuity. But I think we could just say it's a different continuity that's kind of similar, kind of just a little bit different. Technology's different. I would say just forgive that stuff. But yeah, I mean, all those issues are still there of like, how does this fit in? And just as confusing as ever with whatever they're doing with these timelines. But in general, I dug it. I'm excited to see the next episode. Hopefully they'll stick to this. Hopefully the writers can contain themselves and they don't seem to be very good at allegory and subtlety and making a point without having it be on the nose. At least certainly they haven't been with Picard and Discovery and things like that. So hopefully this one they can figure out how to tackle things with metaphors and allegory rather than being like they did on Picard Season 2. Ice is bad. Thanks. That was insightful. Thank you for that. Hopefully they could do a better job of exploring ideas with stories. And episode 1 made me think that's what they're doing. I'm hopeful. I dug it as someone that just really didn't like Picard Season 2. Someone that tried really hard to like Picard Season 1, but by the end I was like, oh, no, this isn't working. And as someone that gave up on Discovery after trying really, really hard to like it, and being just constantly disappointed by how cynical it was. I think maybe there's some hope on this one, but the same writing team, same producers, same everything as these shows that I don't think have been very good. So I'm trying to keep my expectations in check for how long I will be able to enjoy this show. That was my thoughts on it. I don't think this show will be as offensive to Star Trek fans as some of these other ones have been, but sometimes I get a bad read on the room. This show seems to be trying to do Star Trek the right way. It's not just pandering with superficial stuff like Picard Season 2. It's actually returning to the types of adventures and stories that made people love Star Trek. Let's see if it works. Let me know what you thought down below in the comment section. If you want to see my ranking of the Star Trek films, it's right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.